My daughter said, "Nobody remembers your birthday." So I cashed out $130,000 that July morning. The silence cut deeper than any knife ever could. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this story sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe, because this story might help someone draw closer to God's love. Amen. My name is Jennifer Collins, but most people just call me Jenny. I'm 79 years old, and I live alone in the same house my late husband Robert built with his own hands here in Toms River, New Jersey. The morning light filters through the lace curtains I've had for 30 years, casting gentle shadows across the hardwood floors that Robert sanded and stained himself, telling me they had to be perfect for his girls, me and our daughter Amanda. I woke up on July 1st with that familiar sharp ache in my knees, the arthritis that's been my constant companion for the past decade. But there was another ache too, one that settled deep in my chest like a stone. It was my birthday. I knew it before I even opened my eyes. Not because someone had reminded me, but because absolutely no one had. The house felt different that morning. Heavier somehow. I shuffled to the kitchen in my worn slippers, the ones Robert bought me 15 Christmases ago. Their pink roses faded, but still holding together like an old promise. I turned on the kettle, the same one I've used for 20 years, and waited for the whistle that would break the suffocating quiet. I sat at the kitchen window with my tea, watching the American flag I hang every Independence Day flutter in the summer breeze. The red, white, and blue fabric danced against the blue sky, so alive, so free. Inside my house, though, there wasn't a single birthday card on the counter, not one call lighting up my old rotary phone. Not even a text message on the cell phone Amanda insisted I get for emergencies. She hadn't called me in 3 weeks. You see, I raised Amanda completely on my own after Robert died in that terrible car accident when she was just 7 years old. I was 40 and suddenly widowed, left to navigate motherhood alone while my heart was still bleeding from losing the love of my life. I worked 2 jobs, teaching 3rd grade during the day, then cleaning offices at night until my hands were raw and my back screamed in protest. I never remarried, never even dated. Every ounce of my energy, every dollar I earned, every prayer I whispered went to that little girl. I remember kneeling beside her bed every night, watching her sleep, whispering to Jesus, "Please, Lord, help me be enough for her. Help me give her everything she needs." I'd trace the sign of the cross on her forehead with my thumb, the way my own mother had done for me, believing with my whole heart that God would guide us both through the darkness of our grief. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Somewhere between her teenage years and adulthood, Amanda decided I had become a burden. Maybe I got too old, too slow, too set in my ways, too religious, as she often called me with that particular tone of embarrassment that cut straight through my soul. "Mom, stop with the prayers. It's embarrassing," she'd said to me just last Christmas, when I asked if we could say grace before dinner. The words hung in the air like smoke, stinging my eyes and making my throat tight. I'd simply bowed my head and prayed silently, asking God to soften her heart and help her remember the faith that had once been so important to our family. But that July 1st morning, around 10:01 a.m., I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Amanda's voice carried through the screen door before I even saw her face. She walked into my kitchen without knocking, carrying a designer purse that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. This from someone who constantly claimed to be broke, who called me asking for money to pay her electric bill or her car payment. "Hello, Mama," she said, not "happy birthday," not even a hug. Just that tight, practiced smile she wore when she was about to deliver news that would break my heart in a polite, efficient way. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with homework every night for years, where we'd shared countless meals and conversations, where I'd held her when she cried over her first heartbreak. "We need to talk about the house," she said, her voice flat and businesslike. "You know this place is way too much for you now. It's time." "Time for what, sweetheart?" I asked gently, though something in my chest already knew the answer. "To move into assisted living," she replied without missing a beat. "We've already visited a place called Ocean View Senior Suites. It's very clean, very quiet. You'd have your own room and they have activities. Bingo on Wednesdays. My hands trembled as I set down my teacup. And what about the house? She shrugged, as if we were discussing the weather. We'd sell it, of course. Nobody remembers anything about this place except you anyway. Nobody remembers. The words echoed in my mind like a death sentence. Nobody remembers my wedding day. When Robert carried me over this very threshold while I laughed until my sides hurt. Nobody remembers Amanda's first steps, taken right here in the hallway while I clapped and cried with joy. Nobody remembers the nights I stayed up coughing blood, hiding my illness so I could still afford her school fees and dance lessons. Nobody remembers Robert's funeral, held right in our living room because I couldn't afford the funeral home. Nobody remembers the birthday Amanda spent sobbing in my arms when that boy broke her heart in high school, the same birthday she'd sworn she'd never forget. Nobody remembers. I turned my head toward the window to hide the tears that were already spilling down my cheeks. The flag outside continued its cheerful dance, oblivious to the way my world was crumbling inside these walls that had held so much love, so much life, so much history. We've already spoken to a lawyer, Amanda continued, pulling out a folder of papers. We just need your signature on a few documents. It's all very straightforward. I stared at those papers, my vision blurring. I need some time to think about this. She sighed, the sound heavy with impatience. Fine, but I need an answer by tomorrow. We can't wait forever, Mom. I have my own life to think about. After she left, I sat in my empty kitchen for hours, clutching the rosary Robert had given me the day he proposed. The beads were worn smooth from decades of prayers, of desperate pleas to the Virgin Mary, of whispered conversations with Jesus in my darkest moments. I held them now like a lifeline, whispering through my tears, Lord, did I raise a child who would throw me away like garbage? Did I fail so completely that my own daughter can't wait to be rid of me? I prayed, until my knees ached from kneeling on the kitchen floor. I begged God for wisdom, for strength, for some sign that I mattered to someone, somewhere. But that night, even heaven felt silent, and I went to bed feeling more alone than I had since the night Robert died. The next morning, my actual 79th birthday, I woke up with a strange clarity. I dressed carefully in my Sunday best, pinned my small gold cross to my collar, and walked into First National Bank of Toms River. My hands were steady as I filled out the withdrawal slip, $130,000. My entire retirement savings, my emergency fund, everything I had carefully saved and invested over the past 40 years. The teller, a young woman named Sarah, looked concerned. Mrs. Collins, this is a very large withdrawal. Are you sure about this? I met her eyes and nodded. Yes, dear. I'm finally taking care of an emergency. I guess being erased by your own child qualifies as an emergency. I didn't cry at the bank counter that morning. I didn't cry on the drive home, gripping the steering wheel of my old Honda Civic with white knuckles. I waited until I was safely inside my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd fed Amanda thousands of meals, where I'd packed her school lunches with notes that said, Mommy loves you, tucked inside. Then I broke. I dropped to my knees on the linoleum floor that Robert had installed himself 30 years ago, and I wept like a child. Not the quiet, dignified tears of a woman my age, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone whose heart had finally shattered completely. I wept for every birthday I'd celebrated alone these past 15 years. I wept for every sacrifice Amanda never saw, never acknowledged, never remembered. But mostly, I wept for the nights I'd lit candles in front of my small statue of the Sacred Heart, begging Jesus to protect my daughter from the cruelties of this world, only to realize I'd never once asked him to protect me from her. You see, after Robert died, I didn't just raise Amanda. I surrendered my entire existence to her. When she was 8 and wanted to take piano lessons like her friend Jessica, I sold my engagement ring, the one piece of jewelry I treasured above all others, to pay for a year's worth of classes. When the piano teacher said Amanda had real talent, I worked extra cleaning shifts at the medical complex downtown, scrubbing toilets and mopping floors until 2 a.m., just so she could have her own piano. I remember the night I brought that old upright piano home. The delivery men had scratched the hardwood floors, and I spent hours on my hands and knees trying to buff out the marks with furniture polish and tears. But when Amanda sat down and played Für Elise for the first time, her small fingers dancing across the keys, I thought my heart would burst with pride. "Mama, did you hear that? Did you hear how beautiful it sounded?" she'd asked, her face glowing. "Yes, baby," I'd whispered, pulling her into my arms. "You're going to do such wonderful things with this gift." But the piano lessons stopped when she turned 13. "Piano is for nerds, Mom," she'd announced one Tuesday afternoon. "I want to quit." Just like that. 3 years of my life spent cleaning other people's messes, and she walked away without a second thought. The piano still sits in my living room, gathering dust, its keys yellowed and some of them sticking when pressed. Sometimes, late at night, I run my fingers across them and remember. When Amanda was 16, she announced she wanted to attend private school. "All my friends go to Sacred Heart Academy," she'd said, showing me the glossy brochure. "I'm the only one stuck in public school. It's embarrassing." The tuition was $15,000 a year. I was making $32,000 teaching 3rd grade and maybe another $8,000 cleaning offices. But I called the school anyway, spoke to the admissions counselor, begged them to let me pay in monthly installments. "Mrs. Collins," the woman had said kindly, "we do have financial aid available. Would you like me to send you the forms?" I filled out every page, listed every asset, every debt, every source of income. I swallowed my pride and wrote essay after essay about why my daughter deserved this opportunity. When Amanda was accepted with a partial scholarship, I still needed to come up with $8,000 a year. So I sold Robert's tools, his beautiful woodworking tools that he'd collected over 20 years, each one chosen with care, each one a testament to his craftsmanship. The man who bought them offered me $3,000 for the entire collection. I knew they were worth more, but I needed the money immediately. Amanda never knew. She never asked how I managed to pay for Sacred Heart. She just assumed it would happen, the way children assume the sun will rise every morning. During her senior year, when she was applying to colleges, I sat at this same kitchen table helping her fill out application after application. She wanted to go to Boston University, not because of their programs, but because her boyfriend was going there. "Mom, I have to go to BU," she'd said. Her 17-year-old heart convinced this was a matter of life and death. "Jeremy and I are going to get married after graduation. We've already planned everything." The out-of-state tuition was astronomical. Even with student loans, even with the small scholarship she received, I needed to co-sign for additional loans that would take me decades to pay off. But I signed every paper, initialed every line, because I believed in her dreams even when they weren't practical. Jeremy broke up with her during their sophomore year. He'd found someone else, someone whose family had money, someone who could take him to expensive restaurants and ski trips in Vermont. Amanda came home for spring break with swollen eyes and a broken heart. "I hate him, Mama," she'd sobbed, curled up on my couch like she was 7 years old again. "I thought he loved me. I thought we were going to build a life together." I held her while she cried, stroking her hair and whispering the same words I'd whispered when she was small. "Shh, baby. Mama's here. Everything's going to be all right." But inside I was calculating. The loans I'd co-signed, the debt I'd taken on for this relationship that had just evaporated, the sacrifices I'd made so she could chase a boy who'd thrown her away the moment something better came along. Still, I never said a word. I just held her and prayed that God would heal her heart and give her wisdom. She changed her major 3 times at BU. First it was pre-med because she wanted to help people. Then it was business because she wanted to make real money. Finally, it was communications because it was easier to graduate. Each change meant extra semesters, extra costs, extra loans in my name. By the time she graduated at 24, I was $47,000 in debt and still paying off the loans for her high school tuition. The graduation ceremony was on a beautiful May afternoon. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought for Robert's funeral and had worn to every special occasion since, because I couldn't afford anything else. I sat in those uncomfortable folding chairs for 3 hours, waiting to hear Amanda's name called. When she walked across that stage, diploma in hand, I cried tears of joy and exhaustion. We'd done it. Against all odds, despite every financial hardship, my daughter was a college graduate. After the ceremony, she hugged me briefly. "Thanks, Mom," she'd said, already scanning the crowd for her friends. I know you helped with some of the costs. Some of the costs. As if I hadn't mortgaged my entire future for her education. But the real heartbreak came later, during her 20s, when she started to pull away. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Visits home became obligatory. Dutiful affairs where she'd check her phone constantly and make excuses to leave early. "Mom, you worry too much," she'd say when I asked about her job, her apartment, her life. "I'm fine. Everything's fine." But I could see she wasn't fine. She was dating men who treated her poorly, working jobs that didn't challenge her, living paycheck to paycheck despite her expensive education. When she'd call asking for money, $500 for car repairs, $800 for a security deposit, $200 when she lost her job and needed help with rent, I always said yes. I said yes when it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. I said yes when it meant wearing the same winter coat for 8 years. I said yes when it meant skipping my own doctor's appointments because I couldn't afford the copays. Every time I sent her money, I'd include a little note. "I love you, sweetheart. Call me soon." Sometimes she'd call to say thank you. More often, she wouldn't. 3 years ago, Amanda met Marcus. He was charming, handsome, successful, everything I'd prayed for in a partner for my daughter. When she brought him home for Thanksgiving, I cooked for days, wanting everything to be perfect. Marcus was polite, but distant. He complimented my cooking, admired the house Robert had built, asked appropriate questions about my teaching career, but I could see the way he looked around, calculating, appraising, like he was mentally cataloging everything of value. "Your mom has a beautiful home," he told Amanda as they were leaving. Very quaint. The word stung, though I couldn't say exactly why. They got engaged 6 months later. Amanda called to tell me, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, Marcus proposed. We're getting married next fall." I was thrilled for her. Truly I was. But when she started talking about the wedding she wanted, the country club reception, the designer dress, the destination honeymoon, my heart sank. "Mom, I know it's expensive," she'd said, "but Marcus's family is very established. We need to do this right." The wedding cost $35,000. I used the last of my savings and took out another loan against the house. I wore a dress from J.C. Penney and shoes I'd owned for 5 years, but Amanda looked like a princess in her $3,000 gown. During the mother-daughter dance, she whispered in my ear, "Thank you for everything, Mama. I know you've sacrificed so much for me." I thought we'd turned a corner. I thought maybe now, as a married woman, she'd understand what it meant to put someone else first, to make sacrifices out of love. But after the wedding, the calls became even rarer. When I did hear from her, it was usually because she needed something: money, babysitting when she had her son Tyler, help moving to their new house in the expensive part of town. I gave everything I could, always, because that's what mothers do. We give until there's nothing left to give, and then we find more somehow. But lying on my kitchen floor that morning, clutching that bank withdrawal receipt, I finally understood something that had taken me 79 years to learn. There's a difference between loving someone and letting them destroy you. And I had been confusing the two for far too long. The weeks that followed that devastating birthday conversation became a blur of sleepless nights and silent tears. I found myself moving through my empty house like a ghost, touching the walls Robert had painted, running my fingers along the banister he'd carved by hand, wondering how something so solid, so permanent could feel so fragile. It was the small cruelties that cut the deepest, the ones that seemed insignificant to everyone else but accumulated in my heart like tiny stones until I could barely breathe under their weight. Like the Sunday 3 weeks later when I arrived at St. Catherine's for morning mass, wearing my best dress and the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 10th anniversary. I'd been attending this church for 43 years, had volunteered in the soup kitchen every Wednesday for the past decade, had organized the annual Christmas pageant for 15 years running. These people had watched Amanda grow up, had celebrated her milestones with me, had held my hands during Robert's funeral. But that Sunday, as I sat in my usual pew, 3rd row from the front, left side, the same spot where Robert and I had sat as newlyweds, I felt utterly invisible. Mrs. Patterson, who sat behind me, leaned forward to whisper to Mrs. Rodriguez about her grandson's baseball game. Mr. and Mrs. Chen discussed their upcoming trip to visit their daughter in California. The Moretti family passed around photos of their new grandbaby on someone's phone. No one asked how I was doing. No one mentioned that I'd missed the previous Sunday for the first time in years because I'd been too heartbroken to leave my house. No one seemed to notice that I'd lost weight, that my hands shook when I reached for the hymnal, that I kept dabbing at my eyes with the tissue I kept tucked in my sleeve. After Mass, Father Sullivan shook hands with parishioners as they filed out. When he reached me, he smiled his practiced pastoral smile. "Jennifer, good to see you. How are things?" I started, then stopped. How could I explain? How could I tell this busy man, this shepherd of hundreds of souls, that my own daughter was trying to throw me away like trash, that I felt more alone in this room full of faithful people than I did in my empty house? "Fine, Father," I whispered. "Everything's fine." He nodded and moved on to the next person, already forgetting my face before I'd even reached the parking lot. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after that, watching families load into their SUVs and minivans, children climbing into car seats while parents chatted about lunch plans and afternoon activities. Tyler, my grandson, should have been one of those children. Amanda should have been one of those mothers, bringing her son to see his grandmother, including me in their Sunday traditions. Instead, I drove home alone to my silent house and microwaved a frozen dinner that tasted like cardboard and regret. The isolation became a living thing, growing stronger each day. My phone, which used to ring with calls from Amanda at least twice a week, remained stubbornly quiet. When I finally broke down and called her, 3 weeks after her birthday ultimatum, she answered on the 4th ring with an impatient sigh. "Hi, Mom. I'm actually really busy right now. Can I call you back?" But she never did call back. She never did. I started marking the days on my calendar, counting how long it had been since I'd heard my daughter's voice, since I'd seen my grandson's face. 1 week became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 6. During those endless days, I discovered things about Amanda's life through the cruelest medium of all, social media. My neighbor's granddaughter, Emma, had shown me how to use Facebook the previous year, thinking it would help me stay connected with family. What a bitter joke that had turned out to be. Amanda's profile was full of photos I'd never seen, moments I'd never been part of. Pictures of Tyler at the zoo, grinning as he fed giraffes. Amanda and Marcus at expensive restaurants, toasting with wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Family gatherings at Marcus's parents' house, holiday celebrations where Tyler wore adorable outfits and played with cousins I'd never met. The most devastating photo was from Tyler's 6th birthday party. There he was, my beautiful grandson, standing in front of an elaborate superhero-themed cake, surrounded by children and adults whose faces glowed with joy and laughter. The party was clearly at Marcus's parents' house. I could see their elegant dining room in the background, their crystal chandelier catching the light. I stared at that photo for an hour, zooming in on Tyler's face, memorizing the gap where he'd lost his first tooth, the way his hair had grown longer since I'd seen him last. The comments below the photo were filled with congratulations and love. "Happy birthday, Tyler. What a handsome boy. Looks like an amazing party." But I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even known it was happening. I'd sent Tyler a birthday card 3 weeks earlier with a $20 bill inside, money I could barely spare, and had never received so much as a thank you call. Looking at those party photos, I realized Amanda probably hadn't even told him the gift was from me. That night, I lay in bed clutching my rosary beads, whispering the same prayers I'd said every night for 79 years. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." But the words felt hollow, empty, like coins dropping into a wishing well that had long since run dry. "Are you even listening?" I whispered into the darkness. "Do you see what's happening to me? Do you care?" The silence that answered me was deafening. My health began to suffer in ways that scared me. I'd always been strong, resilient, the type of woman who powered through illness and pain without complaint. But the stress of Amanda's betrayal was eating me alive from the inside out. I started having chest pains that would wake me in the middle of the night, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the neighbors could hear it through the walls. My appetite disappeared completely. Food lost all taste and appeal. I'd open the refrigerator and stare at its contents for minutes at a time, unable to summon the energy to prepare even the simplest meal. The headaches were the worst, throbbing, vicious things that felt like someone was driving nails through my skull. I'd sit in my darkened living room with a cold compress on my forehead, wondering if this was how people died of broken hearts. Slowly, painfully, forgotten by the very people who should have cared most. One particularly bad evening in late July, I called my doctor's office. The receptionist, a young woman named Stacy, who'd always been kind to me, listened as I described my symptoms. "Mrs. Collins, these sound like they could be stress-related, but Dr. Martinez would definitely want to see you. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I thought about it. The copay I couldn't really afford. The bus ride to the medical complex because I'd been afraid to drive with my hands shaking so badly. The waiting room full of strangers who all seemed to have someone who cared enough to drive them to their appointments. "Maybe next week?" I said. "Let me see how I feel." But next week never came. Like so many things in my life, I just endured the pain alone and prayed it would eventually stop. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in August. I'd been grocery shopping at the ShopRite where I'd shopped for 40 years, carefully counting out coupons and calculating every purchase to stay within my increasingly tight budget. As I was loading my few bags into my old Honda, I heard a familiar laugh. Amanda was standing 3 cars away, laughing with another woman I didn't recognize. She was wearing a sundress I'd never seen, her hair freshly styled, her nails perfectly manicured. She looked happy, carefree, like someone without a worry in the world. For a moment, I thought about calling out to her. My heart leaped with the possibility of an unexpected reunion, a chance to hug my daughter and hear about Tyler and maybe, just maybe, begin to heal the wound that had been festering between us. But then I heard what she was saying. "Honestly, I think it's early dementia or something," Amanda was telling her friend, her voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "She's become so clingy, so needy. It's like she expects me to be responsible for her entertainment. I have my own life, you know?" Her friend nodded sympathetically. "That's so hard. My mother-in-law went through the same thing. Sometimes you just have to set boundaries." "Exactly," Amanda replied, shifting her expensive purse to her other shoulder. "I mean, I love her, but I can't be her entire social life. It's not healthy for either of us." Clingy, needy. Those words hit me like physical blows. I stood frozen behind my car, my hands gripping the shopping cart so tightly my knuckles went white. This was how my daughter saw me. Not as a woman who'd sacrificed everything for her, but as a burden, an obligation, a problem to be managed. They continued talking for another few minutes, Amanda complaining about how dramatic I'd become, how I guilted her with my sadness, how she was considering having me evaluated by a mental health professional. "The house thing is really for her own good," she concluded. "She needs structure, supervision. I'm actually doing her a favor. A favor. Forcing me out of the home Robert built for us, the place where I'd raised her with love and devotion, was apparently a favor." I waited until they drove away before I allowed myself to collapse against my car. The shopping cart rolled into the vehicle next to mine with a metallic crash that seemed to echo my internal devastation. That night, I didn't even attempt to pray. I sat in Robert's old recliner, staring at the empty wall where Amanda's high school graduation photo used to hang before I'd moved it to make room for a family portrait that never got updated after she stopped wanting to be photographed with me. "Am I being tested, or just forgotten?" I whispered to the darkness. The question hung in the air like an accusation, unanswered and unanswerable. For the first time in my life, I wondered if God was as indifferent to my suffering as my own daughter seemed to be. I fell asleep in that chair, and I dreamed of Robert. In my dream, he was standing in our kitchen, young and strong like he'd been when we first bought this house. He was looking at me with such sadness in his eyes. "Jenny," he said, "what did she do to you?" I woke up crying, and for the first time in months, the tears felt like a relief. 3 days after I withdrew that money, the phone calls started. Not from Amanda. Oh no. She was still too proud, too stubborn to call her clingy, needy mother directly. The first call came from Marcus, her husband, at 7:30 in the morning, while I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee and my worn leather Bible, trying to find comfort in the Book of Psalms. "Jennifer," he said, not even bothering with pleasantries. We need to talk about this bank situation. Bank situation. As if my life savings were nothing more than a clerical error that needed correcting. What bank situation would that be, Marcus? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Don't play games with me, he snapped, and I could hear the barely controlled anger beneath his usually polished exterior. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Amanda is beside herself. She's been crying for 2 days straight. Crying. Amanda was crying. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd spent months making me cry, and now that I'd finally stood up for myself, suddenly tears mattered. I'm sorry she's upset, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I didn't want my daughter to suffer, but I had to make some decisions about my own future. Your future? Marcus's voice rose an octave. Jennifer, you're 79 years old. How much future do you think you have left? The words hit me like a slap across the face. How much future do you think you have left? As if my remaining years were so worthless, so insignificant, that I had no right to control my own money, my own life. I suppose we'll find out, I said quietly, and hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, it's me. Amanda's voice came through the speaker, choked with tears that sounded so much like the ones she'd cried as a little girl that my heart clenched despite everything. Please, pick up. Please. We need to talk about this. I don't understand what's happening. Call me back. But I didn't call back. For the first time in 48 years of motherhood, I didn't drop everything to soothe my daughter's distress. Instead, I went to my garden and tended to the roses Robert had planted for me 30 years ago. They were blooming beautifully that August, their petals soft and fragrant despite the heat. As I deadheaded the spent blooms and watered the soil, I thought about how these flowers had survived storms, droughts, harsh winters, and neglect. They kept blooming because they had strong roots, because they drew their nourishment from deep within the earth, rather than depending on others for their survival. Maybe it was time I learned to do the same. The next morning, Tyler called. My heart nearly stopped when I heard his sweet 7-year-old voice on the other end of the line, the same voice that used to call me Grandma Jenny and beg me to read him just one more story before bedtime. Grandma? He said, and I could hear Amanda coaching him in the background. Mommy says you're sick. Are you okay? Sick? Of course that's how Amanda would explain it to him. Grandma isn't standing up for herself, Tyler. Grandma is just sick. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. How are you? How's school? I'm good. I learned to ride my bike without training wheels. His excitement was infectious, and for a moment, I forgot about the manipulation, the coaching, the adult drama swirling around this innocent child. That's wonderful, Tyler. I'm so proud of you. Mommy says... He paused, and I could hear Amanda whispering urgently in the background. Mommy says you might have to move to a new house, and that you're mad at us. My chest tightened. How dare she use this child as a weapon against me? How dare she put him in the middle of our conflict? Tyler, honey, I'm not mad at you. I could never be mad at you. You're my beautiful grandson, and I love you more than all the stars in the sky. But are you mad at Mommy? His voice was small, confused. Because she's been crying a lot. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. I could reassure him, tell him everything was fine, perpetuate the lie that his mother was a loving daughter who just wanted what was best for me. Or I could tell him the truth, that his mother was trying to steal his grandmother's home and independence, that she saw me as nothing more than a burden to be managed. Neither choice felt right. Both would hurt him. Sometimes adults have disagreements, Tyler, I said finally. But that doesn't change how much I love you. Nothing could ever change that. Mommy wants to talk to you, he said, and before I could respond, Amanda's voice filled the line. Mom, please, she said, and she sounded genuinely desperate now. I don't understand what's happening. You're scaring me. This isn't like you. What isn't like me, Amanda? I asked, taking care of myself? Making decisions about my own life? Taking all that money out of the bank without telling anyone? Mom, that's not rational behavior. That's... She paused, searching for words. That's concerning. Really concerning. Concerning. There was that clinical distance again. That way she had of making my emotions into symptoms, my choices into evidence of mental decline. I'm perfectly rational, I said. I've never been more rational in my life. Then explain it to me. Her voice cracked. Explain why you emptied your entire retirement account. Explain why you won't talk to me. Explain why you're acting like I'm some kind of monster when all I want is to make sure you're safe and cared for. Safe and cared for, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call it? Forcing me out of my home? Talking to lawyers behind my back? Discussing my mental health with strangers in parking lots? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You heard that? Amanda whispered. I heard every word. Clingy, needy, dramatic. That's what you think of me, isn't it? That's what you've thought of me for years. Mom, She started to speak, then stopped. I was frustrated. I was venting to a friend. I didn't mean, you meant every word, I said. And for the first time, I felt something that resembled peace. And you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I have been clingy. Maybe I have been needy. Maybe I have been dramatic. But do you know why? She didn't answer. Because I spent 48 years putting your needs before my own. 48 years sacrificing my own happiness, my own dreams, my own financial security so that you could have everything you wanted. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that I was a person too. I forgot that I deserved respect, love, consideration. You do deserve those things, Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper. You do, Mom. I never said you didn't. But you haven't given them to me, have you? I asked. When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you included me in your family activities? When was the last time you treated me like a mother instead of an obligation? The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken resentments and unacknowledged pain. I'm sorry, she said finally. I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't know you felt this way. I've felt this way for years, Amanda. I just never had the courage to say it before. Please, she said, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. Please don't do this. Don't throw away our relationship over a misunderstanding. Come to dinner Sunday. Bring Tyler's birthday present. He's been asking about you constantly since the party. We can work this out. Tyler's birthday present. The $20 bill I'd sent in a card that had apparently never been acknowledged. What birthday present? I asked quietly. Another silence. Then, the card you sent, with the money. Did Tyler ever receive it? Of course he did. He said thank you. He said thank you to whom, Amanda? To me. He said thank you to me, and I was supposed to call you, but I got busy and… You got busy. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You got busy, so my grandson thinks his grandmother forgot his birthday. That's not… I didn't mean for it to happen that way. But she had meant for it to happen that way. Or at least, she'd been perfectly comfortable letting it happen that way. My relationship with Tyler had been filtered through her, controlled by her, diminished by her casual neglect. I won't be coming to dinner Sunday, I said. Mom, please. But I would like to see Tyler, alone, just the two of us. Maybe we could go to the park, get ice cream, spend some time together without anyone else deciding what we should talk about or how we should feel about each other. I don't think that's a good idea right now, Amanda said quickly. Tyler is confused enough as it is. Maybe after we work through this situation. Work through this situation, I repeated. You mean after I sign your papers and move into assisted living? Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? I asked. Tell me, Amanda, what exactly would need to happen for you to think I was competent to make my own decisions again? What would I need to do to earn back your respect? She didn't have an answer for that. Of course she didn't. I love you, I said finally. I will always love you. You're my daughter, my heart, my greatest joy and my deepest pain. But I won't let you destroy me in the name of love anymore. Mom, would Jesus forgive this too? I asked, more to myself than to her. Should I forgive again? How many times am I supposed to turn the other cheek before I'm allowed to protect myself? Mom, you're scaring me. Good, I said, and I meant it. Maybe it's time you were a little scared. Maybe it's time you realized that actions have consequences, that people you love can be pushed too far, that even the most patient, forgiving, self-sacrificing mother in the world has limits. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my kitchen, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: the absence of guilt. For the first time in decades, I had chosen myself over my daughter's comfort, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. The showdown came exactly 1 week later, on a Saturday morning that dawned bright and clear. I was in my garden, wearing Robert's old work gloves and replanting the herb garden I'd neglected for months, when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway with the kind of force that suggested anger barely held in check. I looked up to see Amanda's SUV parked behind Marcus's luxury sedan. They'd brought reinforcements too. Marcus's mother, Eleanor, stepped out of the back seat wearing her usual expression of refined disapproval, and behind her came someone I didn't recognize, a middle-aged woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase. Amanda marched across my lawn like a general leading an assault, her face flushed with righteous indignation. She was wearing what I'd come to think of as her dealing with difficult people outfit, a crisp white blouse and navy slacks that made her look professional and authoritative. Behind her, Marcus adjusted his tie with the nervous precision of a man preparing for battle. "Mom," Amanda announced without preamble, "we need to have a family meeting. Right now." I stood up slowly, brushing the soil from my gloves, and looked at this small army assembled on my front lawn. A month ago, their presence would have terrified me, would have sent me scurrying to comply with whatever demands they'd come to make. Today, I felt only a calm certainty that this was my home, my property, and I would decide who was welcome here. "Good morning, Amanda. Marcus. Eleanor." I nodded politely to each of them, then looked at the woman with the briefcase. "I don't believe we've met." "This is Sharon Goldstein," Marcus said, stepping forward with the aggressive confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. "She's a geriatric care manager. We've asked her to do an assessment." An assessment. They'd brought a professional to evaluate my mental competency, to provide official justification for their plans to control my life. "How thoughtful," I said mildly, "but completely unnecessary. I've already had a thorough evaluation by my own physician." Amanda's eyes narrowed. "What evaluation? When?" "Dr. Martinez examined me on Thursday. Full cognitive assessment, complete physical workup. I have the paperwork inside if you'd like to see it." This was true. David had recommended the evaluation, and Dr. Martinez had been thorough, kind, and utterly clear in his assessment. I was physically healthy, mentally sharp, and fully capable of making my own decisions. He'd even commented on how much better I looked than during my last visit, how my color had improved and my energy seemed restored. "You can't just doctor shop until you get the result you want," Marcus said, his voice taking on the bullying tone he used when he felt challenged. "Sharon is board certified, experienced in these situations. She knows the signs of diminished capacity that a family doctor might miss. I'm sure she's very qualified," I replied, still maintaining my calm tone. "But she wasn't invited here today, and I don't consent to any assessment. This is my home, and I decide who comes inside." Eleanor stepped forward then, her patrician voice dripping with the kind of condescension that wealthy people mistake for wisdom. "Jennifer, dear, you're being very unreasonable. We're all family here. We all want what's best for you." "Are we?" I asked, looking directly at her. "Family, I mean. Because in my experience, family members don't try to steal each other's homes. Family members don't hire professionals to declare each other incompetent. Family members don't abandon each other for months and then show up with demands and ultimatums." Amanda's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment I saw the little girl she'd once been, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Mom, please. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. We love you. We're worried about you." "Then sit down," I said, gesturing to the porch chairs Robert had built himself 20 years ago. "Send your professional evaluator away, and let's talk like family. Just us." "That's not happening," Marcus interjected. "We didn't come here for a social visit. We came here to resolve the situation." Resolve this situation. There it was again. That clinical language that reduced my life, my feelings, my rights to a problem that needed managing. "What situation would that be, Marcus?" I asked, settling into my favorite porch chair and folding my hands in my lap. The morning sun felt warm on my face, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the church bells of St. Catherine's calling people to Saturday evening mass. The normalcy of it all, the sunshine, the bells, the familiar comfort of my own front porch, gave me strength. The situation where you've lost your mind and emptied your bank accounts. Marcus exploded, his professional composure finally cracking. The situation where you're acting like a selfish, stubborn old woman who can't accept that she needs help. The silence that followed his outburst was deafening. Even Amanda looked shocked by her husband's viciousness, her hand flying to her mouth as if she could somehow call back his words. "Marcus," Eleanor said sharply, "that's enough." But it wasn't enough for me. Something about his words, about the naked contempt in his voice, crystallized everything I'd been feeling for months into perfect, brilliant clarity. "Selfish," I repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "That's interesting. Let me tell you what selfish looks like, Marcus." I stood up, and though I was a full head shorter than my son-in-law, something in my posture made him take a step backward. "Selfish is working 2 jobs for 18 years to pay for your wife's education while she complained that I wasn't giving her enough attention. Selfish is selling my wedding ring to buy her a piano she abandoned after 3 years. Selfish is co-signing loans that bankrupted me so she could chase a boy who dumped her for someone richer. Selfish is taking out a second mortgage on this house to pay for a wedding that cost more than most people make in a year." My voice was rising now. 48 years of suppressed resentment finally finding its voice. Selfish is spending my retirement savings on emergencies that were never really emergencies, on crises that could have been solved if anyone had bothered to budget responsibly. Selfish is giving and giving and giving until there's nothing left of me but an empty shell you could push around and manipulate. Amanda was crying now, real tears streaming down her face, but I wasn't finished. "You want to know what's not selfish? Finally saying no. Finally protecting what little I have left. Finally refusing to let people who claim to love me treat me like a disposable resource." "Mom, please," Amanda started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." I looked at each of them in turn. These people who'd invaded my home with their demands and their professionals and their certainty that they knew what was best for me. "You want to put me in assisted living? Fine. But you'll do it over my dead body. Because this house is now in a trust that none of you can touch. You want access to my money? It's gone. Every penny. Donated to charities that actually help people instead of exploiting them." This wasn't entirely true. I'd kept enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But the shock on their faces was worth the small deception. "You want to have me declared incompetent? Good luck with that. I have medical documentation from 3 separate doctors stating that I'm in excellent mental health. I have a lawyer who specializes in elder abuse. And I have friends who will testify to my character and competency." Sharon Goldstein, the geriatric care manager, cleared her throat. "Mrs. Collins, perhaps we could—" "No," I said firmly. "Perhaps we couldn't. You're not welcome here. None of you are welcome here unless you can treat me with the respect I deserve." "What do you want from us?" Amanda asked, her voice breaking. "What do we have to do to make this right?" I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd loved more than my own life, this child I'd sacrificed everything for, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Pity, not for her tears or her distress, but for the person she'd become. Someone who could love only when it was convenient, who could care only when it didn't cost her anything. "I want you to leave," I said quietly. "I want you to go home and think about what kind of daughter you've been to me. I want you to ask yourself if this is how you'd want Tyler to treat you when you're old and vulnerable. And I want you to pray, really pray, about what God expects from us when it comes to honoring our parents." The reference to scripture hit its mark. Amanda had been raised in the church, had memorized the 10 Commandments as a child. Honor your father and mother wasn't just a suggestion in our faith. It was a divine command. "The Bible also says to forgive," Eleanor said primly, apparently deciding this was her moment to contribute wisdom. I smiled at her, and it wasn't a kind smile. "You're absolutely right, Eleanor. The Bible does say to forgive, but it also says to be wise as serpents and test everything, hold fast to what is good. It says to protect the vulnerable and care for the widows. It doesn't say anywhere that forgiveness means letting people destroy you. I paused, looking directly at Amanda. I forgive you, sweetheart. I forgive all of you. But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to enable your bad behavior anymore. It doesn't mean I have to pretend that what you've done to me is acceptable. And it certainly doesn't mean I have to hand over my home and my independence to make your lives easier. Marcus made one last attempt. Jennifer, you're 79 years old. What happens when you fall? When you have a medical emergency? When you can't take care of yourself anymore? Then I'll deal with those situations when they arise, I said calmly. Like millions of other independent seniors do every day. I'll hire help if I need it. I'll move to assisted living if I choose to. But I'll make those decisions for myself, based on my own needs and preferences, not on your timeline or your financial convenience. I stood up and walked to my front door, then turned back to face them. I want you to leave now, all of you. And I want you to think very carefully about whether you want to be part of my life going forward. Because from now on, our relationship, if we have one, will be based on mutual respect and genuine care, not manipulation and control. Mom, please don't do this, Amanda pleaded one last time. I'm not doing anything, sweetheart, I said, my hand on the doorknob. I'm finally stopping letting you do things to me. And with that, I went inside my house, and closed the door on 48 years of putting everyone else's needs before my own. Through the window, I watched them argue on my front lawn for several minutes before finally getting back in their cars and driving away. Sharon Goldstein left first, her professional services clearly no longer needed. Eleanor went next, her disapproval radiating from every line of her rigid posture. Amanda and Marcus were the last to leave. I saw Amanda look back at the house once, her face streaked with tears, and for a moment my maternal instincts screamed at me to run outside, to take her in my arms, to make everything all right the way I always had. But I didn't move. I stayed at my window, watching the woman I'd raised drive away from the home where she'd grown up, and I felt something I'd never expected to feel at such a moment. Peace. Deep, abiding, soul-restoring peace. For the first time in decades, I was free. 3 weeks after that confrontation on my front porch, I did something I hadn't done in over 15 years. I bought myself a new dress. Not for any special occasion, not because I needed it for church or a wedding or a funeral. I bought it simply because I saw it in the window of Harper's Boutique downtown and thought, that's beautiful. I would feel beautiful wearing that. The dress was a soft lavender color with tiny flowers embroidered around the neckline. And when I tried it on in the fitting room, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me in the mirror. She stood straighter than I remembered. Her eyes were brighter. She looked like someone who mattered, someone who deserved beautiful things. It's perfect on you, said Margaret, the store owner, as I emerged from the fitting room. You look radiant. Radiant. When was the last time anyone had used that word to describe me? I wore the dress home, feeling lighter with every step. As I walked down Main Street, people I'd known for decades seemed to notice me differently. Mrs. Patterson from church stopped me to compliment the color. Tom Henderson, who ran the hardware store, tipped his hat and said I looked lovely as always, though I couldn't remember him ever saying that before. Maybe it wasn't the dress at all. Maybe it was the way I was carrying myself, like someone who finally remembered her own worth. That afternoon, I did something else unprecedented. I called the travel agency downtown and booked a trip. Not a modest, practical vacation to visit relatives or attend a church retreat, but a real adventure. 2 weeks in Ireland, visiting the countryside my grandmother had described to me in stories when I was small. "Ireland!" exclaimed Denise, the travel agent, her enthusiasm bubbling over the phone. "How wonderful! Have you been before?" "No," I said, marveling at the word. "I've never been anywhere, really. But I've always wanted to see the cliffs of Moher, the Ring of Kerry. My grandmother used to tell me stories. We'll make sure you see everything," Denise promised. "When would you like to go?" "Next month," I said, surprising myself with the immediacy of it. I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to wait anymore. Those words became my new motto. For decades, I'd been waiting for Amanda to appreciate me, waiting for the right time to pursue my own interests, waiting for permission to live my own life. At 79, I was finally done waiting. The changes started small but grew exponentially. I replaced the old, scratchy towels I'd been using for years with thick, luxurious ones in my favorite shade of blue. I bought fresh flowers for my kitchen table every week. Not for company, but for me. I started taking long walks through neighborhoods I'd never explored, discovering gardens and architecture and small details of beauty I'd been too preoccupied to notice before. Most significantly, I began attending a different church. St. Catherine's, where I'd worshipped for over 4 decades, had become too loaded with memories of feeling invisible and overlooked. So I started visiting other congregations, looking for a spiritual community where I could be myself rather than the woman everyone expected me to be. I found it at New Hope Presbyterian, a smaller church on the other side of town. Pastor Williams was a woman about my age who'd come to ministry after raising her own family, and her sermons spoke directly to people who'd spent years caring for others and were just beginning to understand that God wanted them to care for themselves too. "Self-love isn't selfish," she said during my second Sunday there, as if she were speaking directly to me. "It's essential. How can we love our neighbors as ourselves if we don't know what it means to truly love ourselves?" After the service, I introduced myself to Pastor Williams. When I mentioned that I'd been attending St. Catherine's but was looking for a new spiritual home, she smiled warmly. "Sometimes we outgrow the places that once nurtured us," she said. "That doesn't diminish what they gave us in their season, but it doesn't mean we have to stay there forever." I joined the church's women's Bible study group, something I'd never had time for at St. Catherine's, because I'd always been too busy helping with other people's projects and responsibilities. These women, Sarah, Joan, Miriam, Betty, were all around my age, all with their own stories of sacrifice and service, all learning to rediscover themselves in this season of life. "I spent 45 years making sure everyone else was happy," said Betty during our first meeting, as we studied the story of Mary and Martha. "I was so busy serving, I forgot to sit at Jesus' feet and just be." "I think that's what Jesus was trying to tell Martha," added Joan. "Not that service isn't important, but that we matter too. Our souls, our needs, our relationship with God, they're not selfish luxuries." For the first time in years, I felt part of a community that saw me as Jennifer, not just as Amanda's mother, or Robert's widow, or someone's helper. These women were interested in my thoughts, my experiences, my dreams for the future. It was Sarah who suggested I consider volunteering at the Literacy Center downtown. "You were a teacher for so many years," she said after I'd mentioned feeling restless, wanting to do something meaningful with my newfound freedom. "Think of all the knowledge and experience you have to share." The Toms River Literacy Center was housed in an old Victorian mansion that had been converted into a community center. When I walked through its doors for the first time, I felt a familiar excitement. The same feeling I'd experienced on my first day of teaching, decades ago. "We desperately need someone with your background," said Linda Chen, the program coordinator, after I'd explained my teaching experience and my desire to volunteer. "We have adult learners who've been waiting months for a tutor, and we have children who need help with reading after school." I started with both programs, 3 afternoons a week with adults who were learning to read for the first time, and 2 mornings a week with elementary school children whose parents worked multiple jobs and couldn't afford private tutoring. The work was challenging and deeply rewarding in ways I'd forgotten were possible. My adult students, Maria, who'd immigrated from Honduras and wanted to read to her grandchildren, James, a 60-year-old construction worker who'd hidden his illiteracy his entire adult life, Patricia, a young mother determined to earn her GED, approached learning with a hunger and gratitude that reminded me why I'd become a teacher in the first place. The children were equally inspiring. Little Kevin, whose mother cleaned offices at night and slept during the day, blossomed when he realized someone was genuinely interested in his progress. Sophia, who'd been held back a grade and thought she was stupid, discovered she was actually quite brilliant when someone took the time to explain concepts in a way that matched her learning style. "Mrs. Collins," Kevin said one afternoon after successfully reading his first complete chapter book, "you make me feel smart." "You make me feel smart." I carried those words home with me and treasured them like jewels. The work at the Literacy Center led to other opportunities. Linda asked if I'd consider serving on the board of directors. The local library invited me to help develop their adult education program. The community college reached out about teaching a continuing education course for seniors. For the first time in my adult life, people were seeking me out for my expertise, my wisdom, my contributions, not for what I could give them financially or how I could solve their personal problems. The transformation wasn't just external. Something fundamental had shifted inside me, something that went deeper than new clothes or travel plans or volunteer work. I was rediscovering who Jennifer Collins was when she wasn't defined by her relationships to other people. I started keeping a journal, something I'd never done before. Every morning I'd sit at my kitchen table with my coffee and write about my thoughts, my plans, my observations about the world around me. The act of putting my inner life into words felt revolutionary. For so many years, my thoughts and feelings had seemed unimportant compared to everyone else's needs. Some mornings I wrote about practical things, the garden I was planning for spring, the books I wanted to read, the places I hoped to visit. Other mornings I wrote about deeper subjects, forgiveness, self-worth, the nature of love, what it meant to serve God by honoring the person He'd created me to be. One morning, about 6 weeks after my confrontation with Amanda, I wrote something that surprised me. I used to think that loving someone meant erasing yourself for them. I thought that's what Jesus did. Gave up everything, suffered for others, put everyone else first. But I'm beginning to understand that Jesus knew exactly who He was. He knew His worth, His purpose, His identity as God's beloved Son. He served from a place of fullness, not emptiness. He gave out of abundance, not desperation. Maybe that's what I need to learn. How to love from wholeness instead of brokenness. The insight felt profound and liberating. I wasn't abandoning Christian principles by setting boundaries and honoring my own needs. I was finally learning to embody them properly. As autumn arrived, I received an unexpected phone call that would have devastated me months earlier, but now felt like a confirmation of my new path. Mrs. Collins, this is Emma Morrison from the Toms River Gazette. I'm writing a feature article about local volunteers who are making a difference in our community, and your name came up several times. Would you be interested in being interviewed? Me? Someone wanted to interview me, to write about my work, to present me as someone worth knowing about? The article appeared on the front page of the Gazette's community section 2 weeks later, with a photograph of me reading with Kevin and Sophia at the Literacy Center. The headline read, "Local Teacher Finds New Purpose in Retirement," and the article described my work with adult learners and at-risk children. But the most meaningful part wasn't the public recognition. It was the line Emma had written near the end. Mrs. Collins radiates the kind of joy that comes from living authentically, from using one's gifts in service of others while honoring one's own worth and dignity. Living authentically, using my gifts, honoring my own worth and dignity. This was who I was meant to be. This was the woman God had created me to become, if I'd had the courage to trust His plan for my life instead of everyone else's plans for me. That evening, as I sat in my garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I whispered a prayer of gratitude that felt different from any prayer I'd ever prayed before. "Thank you, Lord," I said, "for not letting me die before I learned how to live." It was then that I realized something profound. Amanda's rejection, painful as it had been the catalyst for my liberation. God had used even her cruelty to show me who I really was when I stopped trying to be who everyone else needed me to be. For the first time in my life, I was grateful for my suffering, because it had led me to joy I never could have imagined. 6 months later, on a crisp February morning that sparkled with fresh snow, I was sitting in my kitchen reading my Bible and drinking coffee from my favorite mug, the one that said, "World's Best Teacher," that a student had given me 20 years ago, when I heard a tentative knock at my front door. Through the window, I could see Amanda standing on my porch, shifting her weight from one foot to the other like she used to do as a child when she was nervous about asking for something. She was alone this time. No Marcus, no lawyers, no professionals with briefcases, just my daughter, looking smaller and more uncertain than I'd seen her in years. I took my time answering the door, not out of cruelty, but because I needed those few moments to center myself, to remember who I was now, to pray for wisdom and discernment. The woman who opened that door would not be the same woman who'd been pushed around and manipulated for decades. She would be someone who loved deeply, but also honored herself. Someone who forgave freely, but also maintained healthy boundaries. "Hello, Amanda," I said, opening the door but not immediately inviting her inside. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and I could see she'd been crying. I was wondering if we could talk. Please." I studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged with exhaustion or defeat. She looked like someone who'd been carrying a heavy burden and had finally reached the point where she couldn't bear the weight anymore. "Of course," I said, stepping back to let her enter. "Would you like some coffee?" She nodded gratefully, and I noticed how she looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. The fresh flowers on the table, the new curtains I'd hung, the way the morning light seemed to make everything glow with warmth and life. "The house looks different," she said, accepting the mug I offered her. "Better. Happier, somehow." "Thank you. I've been making some changes." I settled into my chair across from her, the same chair where I'd sat for so many difficult conversations over the years. But this time felt different. This time, I was centered in my own power, secure in my own worth. We sipped our coffee in silence for a few moments, and I waited. I'd learned over these past months the power of silence, of letting other people fill the uncomfortable spaces with their own truths, instead of rushing to make everyone comfortable. Finally, Amanda spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said, about what kind of daughter I've been to you, about how I'd want Tyler to treat me when I'm your age." I nodded, but didn't respond. There was more she needed to say, and I could sense her struggling to find the words. "Mom, She paused, tears starting to flow. "I've been horrible to you, truly horrible. And the worst part is I knew it. Even while I was doing it, part of me knew how wrong it was, how cruel I was being, but I couldn't seem to stop myself." "Why?" I asked gently, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. "Help me understand." She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup as if the answers might be floating there among the steam. I think I resented you," she said finally. "Isn't that awful? I resented my own mother for loving me too much, for sacrificing too much, for making me feel guilty every time I didn't live up to your expectations." "What expectations?" I asked, genuinely confused. "That I'd be grateful enough, good enough, successful enough to justify all your sacrifices. Every time you worked extra hours to pay for something I wanted, every time you went without so I could have more, it felt like a debt I could never repay. And instead of feeling grateful, I felt trapped." This was not what I'd expected to hear, and I found myself truly listening, trying to understand this perspective I'd never considered. "And then Marcus came along," she continued, "and his family has money, real money, and they made everything look so easy. His mother never had to work 2 jobs. She never had to sell her jewelry to pay for piano lessons. She never made Marcus feel like he owed her anything for raising him. So you started to see me as, what, an embarrassment?" Amanda flinched at the word but nodded. "I know how terrible that sounds. But yes, your little house, your old car, your thrift store clothes, the way you'd get so excited about small things that Marcus's family took for granted. I wanted to fit into their world. And you reminded me of where I came from." The honesty was brutal, but I found myself oddly grateful for it. This was the truth I'd needed to hear, the explanation that made sense of years of confusing behavior. "And when you got older," she went on, "when you started needing more from me, I panicked. I thought, I can't take care of her the way she took care of me. I don't have that in me." So instead of admitting that, instead of asking for help or trying to find a better way, I just pushed you away. I convinced myself you were being needy and dramatic, so I wouldn't have to face my own inadequacy. She was sobbing now, and every maternal instinct in my body screamed at me to reach across the table, to hold her, to comfort her, to tell her everything was all right. But I didn't move. This was important. This truth-telling. It needed to happen completely before any healing could begin. "I almost lost Tyler," she said suddenly, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What do you mean?" Marcus had an affair. with his secretary, of all cliches. When I found out, when everything fell apart, when I needed support and love and someone to tell me I was going to be okay, I called you, over and over. But you didn't answer. I remembered those calls, the ones that had come 2 weeks after our confrontation. I'd seen Amanda's name on the caller ID and had chosen not to answer, still too hurt and angry to engage. I was so angry, she continued. I thought, how dare she not be there when I need her? After everything I've done. And then I realized what I'd just thought. After everything I've done. What had I done, Mom? What had I ever done to deserve your unconditional availability? What happened with Tyler? I asked, steering her back to what felt like the most important part. He heard Marcus and me fighting. He heard Marcus say terrible things about you, about how you were crazy and manipulative and that it was good we'd dealt with you when we did. And Tyler? Tyler looked at Marcus and said, "That's my grandma you're talking about. She's nice and she loves me and she sends me birthday cards." And then he looked at me and asked, "Why don't we ever see Grandma Jenny anymore? Why doesn't she come to my baseball games like Tommy's grandma does?" She paused, wiping her eyes with the tissue I handed her. I didn't have a good answer, Mom. I realized that my 7-year-old son had more loyalty and love for you than I'd shown in years. He missed you. He'd been asking about you constantly, and I'd been making excuses, putting him off, telling him you were busy or tired. "Is that when you decided to come here today?" I asked. "No. I decided to come here when Tyler asked me something else. He said, 'Mommy, when you get old like Grandma Jenny, will I be mean to you too?'" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge and a prophecy. "Out of the mouths of babes," I murmured. I couldn't answer him, Mom. I literally couldn't speak, because I realized that yes, if I raised him the way I was raising him, if I taught him by example that it was okay to discard people when they became inconvenient, then yes, he probably would treat me exactly the way I've been treating you. She reached across the table then, not to grab my hands but simply to offer hers, palms up, in a gesture of vulnerability I hadn't seen from her since she was small. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. "I know I've probably damaged our relationship beyond repair, but I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what I've done, how wrong I've been, how much I've hurt you, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the manipulative, entitled woman who'd tried to steal my home, but a broken person who'd lost her way and was finally ready to admit it. I saw someone who'd been shaped by forces she didn't fully understand, who'd made terrible choices but was now capable of acknowledging them. Most importantly, I saw someone who was genuinely repentant, not just sorry she'd been caught or sorry things hadn't worked out the way she'd planned, but truly remorseful about the pain she'd caused. "I forgive you," I said simply. "I've already forgiven you. But Amanda, forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. I can't go back to being the woman who sacrificed herself for everyone else's comfort. That woman almost died from neglect, my own neglect of myself." "I know," she said. "I don't want you to go back to that either. I want to learn how to have a healthy relationship with you. I want Tyler to see what it looks like when family members treat each other with respect and kindness. I want to be a better daughter, but I don't know how. It starts with honesty," I said. "Like what you've shared today. It continues with boundaries, mine and yours, and it grows through consistency over time, not grand gestures or dramatic changes." She nodded, tears still flowing, but her posture straighter, more hopeful. Would you be willing to try? To see if we can build something new together?" I considered the question carefully. The old Jennifer would have said yes immediately, would have swept away months of pain in her eagerness to restore harmony. But the new Jennifer, the one who'd learned to value herself, needed to think about what this relationship might look like going forward. "I'm willing to try," I said finally, "but on some conditions. Anything. First, Tyler, I want to see my grandson regularly, without supervision, without you deciding what we can talk about or do together. He's part of my life, and I want to be part of his." "Yes, absolutely." Second, respect. For my choices, my home, my independence. You don't get to make decisions about my life, and I don't need your approval for how I live it. I understand. Third, honesty. If you have concerns about me, you bring them to me directly. No more talking about me behind my back. No more conspiracies with Marcus or lawyers or care managers. Done. And finally, I said, standing up and walking to my kitchen window, you need to understand that I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. I have my own life now, my own purposes, my own relationships and commitments. I'm not sitting here waiting to be needed. I'm not available to solve every crisis or provide emergency funding or emotional support whenever it's convenient for you. I'm glad, she said, and she sounded like she meant it. I'm glad you have your own life. You deserve that. I turned back to face her, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were meeting as equals. Two adult women who happened to be related, rather than a parent and child trapped in dysfunctional patterns. Would you like to meet some of the people who've become important to me? I asked. My friends from church? The students I tutor? Would you like to see the life I've built? Her face lit up with genuine interest. I'd love that. As we finished our coffee and made plans to attend church together the following Sunday, I marveled at how different this conversation felt from any we'd had in years. There was no manipulation, no hidden agendas, no emotional landmines waiting to explode. Just two women, both imperfect, both learning, both committed to doing better. Later that evening, after Amanda had left, I sat in Robert's old chair with my journal and wrote, "Today I learned something profound about forgiveness. It's not about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It's not about making excuses for people's behavior or taking responsibility for their choices. Forgiveness is about refusing to let other people's actions define your future. It's about choosing hope over bitterness, growth over stagnation, love over fear. Today, for the first time in my adult life, I felt like a mother who was also a whole person. Not just someone's caretaker or provider or emotional support system, but a woman with her own identity, her own purpose, her own relationship with God. I think this is what Jesus meant when he said his yoke is easy and his burden is light. When we stop carrying burdens that were never ours to carry, when we stop trying to control outcomes that were never ours to control, when we learn to love from abundance instead of emptiness, everything becomes possible. 3 months later, Tyler spent his first weekend at my house since he was 3 years old. We planted a garden together, read books on the front porch, and talked about everything from baseball to butterflies to what it means to follow Jesus. On Sunday morning, as we were getting ready for church, he looked at me with those serious 8-year-old eyes and said, "Grandma Jenny, I'm glad you're not sick anymore." "I wasn't really sick, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to his level. "I was just sad for a while, but I'm better now." "Because you remembered that you're important too?" he asked with the startling insight that children sometimes possess. "Yes," I said, hugging him close, "because I finally remembered that I'm important too." Now, as I finish telling you this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever given so much of yourself to others that you forgot who you were underneath all that giving? Have you ever confused love with self-destruction, service with self-erasure? If any of this sounds familiar, please know that it's never too late to rediscover yourself. It's never too late to set boundaries, to honor your own needs, to remember that God created you as a precious individual worthy of love and respect, including your own. Share in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever experienced something like this? How did faith help you or them find the strength to change? If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Someone in your life might need to hear this message about the difference between loving others and losing yourself. May God bless everyone who's ever felt forgotten, overlooked, or taken for granted. May you find the courage to remember who you are in Christ, and may you discover the joy that comes from loving others without sacrificing the beautiful person God created you to be. In Jesus' name, amen.